The Cold War is a fading memory for most of us. For 50 years, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in an arms race that put Arkansas right in the nuclear crosshairs. The reason? 18 Titan II nuclear missiles, the most powerful weapons in the U.S. Cold War arsenal. In tonight's THV Extra, Charles Krausen takes a long look back into Arkansas's nuclear past. Charles.
Thanks, Mike. The year was 1957. Both the U.S. and Soviets had atomic weapons, but the Soviet Union successfully launched the world's first satellite into orbit, effectively firing the first shot in a space and arms race. The U.S. found itself woefully behind, and Arkansas found itself right in the middle of it. Barren fields, exposed wiring, and roads leading to concrete slabs serve as some of the only remaining landmarks of Arkansas's role in the Cold War of the mid-20th century.
The Air Force put out a report in the late 1970s that estimated that anywhere near 75 Russian nuclear warheads were aimed at various targets in Arkansas.
But to gain an understanding of why Arkansas became such a viable target, you have to go back almost 50 years. The launch of the Soviet satellite Sputnik and its counterpart Sputnik 2 brought with it an alarming sense of fear for many Americans and started the clock on an arms race unlike any seen in human history. Little Rock Air Force Base historian Chris Rumley explains.
But it was also more alarming that the missile that had launched that satellite into space could also be capable of carrying a nuclear warhead to the heartland of America.
A nuclear threat wasn't a new concept to Americans.
The threat of nuclear warfare is a threat to all of us.
The country's civil defense began preparing its people for a nuclear attack as early as 1950.
Be alert. Stay alert.
Russia's development of a hydrogen bomb in 1952, coupled with the Sputnik project of 1957, forced President Dwight Eisenhower to acknowledge the country's vulnerability to attack and the need to develop a response quickly.
We can be vigilant, we can be Americans.
The United States increased development of its missile systems throughout the 50s with projects like Atlas, Thor, and in 1959, the military's first intercontinental ballistic missile, Titan I. Named for the gods of Greek mythology, the Titan missile provided the ability to strike targets from thousands of miles away. And in 1963, the second, more powerful generation, the Titan II, was introduced.
It was far ahead of its time, and
Retired Air Force Colonel Jimmy Gray worked in the Titan II program.
the Russians were very afraid of it.
Afraid of both the missile's far-reaching capability and for the 9.5 megaton nuclear warhead each carried.
That was the largest weapon ever deployed by any military force in the entire world.
An enormous weapon that Colonel Gray says must be put into perspective to understand.
1 megaton of explosives would fill a train about 300 miles long. Now multiply that by 9.
A heavyweight with a heavy job that found its way to Arkansas. In 1960, the Air Force announced plans to resurrect the 308th Strategic Missile Wing and build 18 Titan II silos in predominantly rural locations of the state. Other states housing silos included Kansas and Arizona, totaling 54 Titan II sites.
The first thing they had in common is they were very near an Air Force base that could manage the operations and support of the missiles. They were also in areas that were less densely populated.
Actually, the silo was like a small city. It had a kitchen and all kinds of amenities for the crew. It was a very complex missile site.
Construction continued, even as the country found itself entrenched in the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 under President John F. Kennedy.
Not 4 months after the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved, the first missile entered the silo near Searcy.
That was February 23, 1963, and by the end of the year, all of Arkansas's Titan IIs were activated, ready for duty. But retired Air Force Major Vince Mays says the training was a different story.
They were sort of making up their tech debt as they came in, and so it was really quite a very primitive operation when they started as far as the training technique.
Slated for 10 years of active duty, the Titan II remained online for 25 years and was not without its share of problems related to the missile's highly toxic liquid fuel system.
Anytime you have liquid fuel, it creates a lot of problems, and it ages the system. I was really more afraid of the liquid fuel than I was the nuclear weapon.
The Titan II also had a history of tragedy. The first happened August 9, 1965, at the site north of Searcy in the town of Albion. A crew of civilians was working on a series of upgrades when a fire broke out in the silo. In all, 53 workers died. The second occurred September 18, 1980 at the 4-7 silo near Damascus. When a worker dropped an 8-pound socket 70 feet into the silo, the socket punctured a hole in the missile's fuel tank. Retired Colonel Jimmy Gray was outside the site when it exploded.
And it knocked me to the ground, and I looked up and I saw this huge ball of flame.
Considered outdated and dangerous by some, President Ronald Reagan announced in 1981 that all Titan IIs would be deactivated by 1987.
It was a great nuclear deterrent, and I think it was one of the prime factors in leading to the end of the Cold War.
The silos were imploded using heavy explosives, then filled with dirt and covered with concrete, leaving few reminders of a time when Arkansas played a major role in a standoff between rival superpowers, each with their finger on the button, but neither compelled to press it. And with 14 practice launches to its credit, the 308th was considered by many to be the best Titan II missile wing before the program was decommissioned in 1987. Mike?
Interesting stuff, Charles. Coming up tomorrow night, we'll take a closer look at the 1965 fire at the Titan II silo near Searcy. If you'd like to learn more about the Titan II missile program, log on to our website at todaysthb.com and click on the story.